welcome to the Pulpit Fiction Podcast, the lectionary podcast for preachers, seekers, and Bible geeks. This is episode 653 for the first Sunday of Christmas, year A. It's December 28th, 2025. For this show, we're going to be talking about our gospel reading of Matthew 2, verses 13 through 23, the flight to Egypt. The first reading of the day is Isaiah. It's our second reading, but the lectionary calls it the first reading, Isaiah 63. Verses 7 through 9, God's faithful acts. And then we'll wrap it up with our tasty wafer. The second reading is Hebrews chapter 2, verses 10 through 18. I'm Rob McCoy, United Methodist pastor here in Rock Island, Illinois, and I'm joined as always by my good friend and co-host from the shining shores of Crystal Lake, UCC pastor Eric Fissler. How are you doing, buddy?
I'm well. Things are going well. You know, we are recording this on the 17th of December. So for all of you wonderful people that are checking, that means we are a week out from Christmas Eve. So all the joys and things that come with being a week out from Christmas Eve, Rob. But it's good. You know, I mean, nothing. It's Christmas Eve. It's what we do every year. Yeah. So it's all good stuff. Waiting to see. This may be, as we are getting closer, this may be the first Saturday that we don't have either a dangerous cold front move in or a snowstorm. So this has just been the worst luck this year. But on the flip side of things, Rob, I think we are headed for one of the best Christmas Eves. It's supposed to be warm. The weather's supposed to be good. So we're hoping we're going to get a lot of folks in Christmas Eve this year. So kind of just looking forward to that.
Okay, but if the snow is gone by Christmas Eve, I'm going to be really mad.
You know that it will be. You know it will be.
It's the one good thing about it is that it's pretty on Christmas Eve. We've been buried, we've been frozen. If it's actually melted, if it's melted and muddy and gross on Christmas Eve, I'm actually going to be mad, I think. So
I hear you, man. It's the fact that it's been this way for so long is just mind-boggling to me, right? The fact that it has been white and snowy all month, and 2 days before Christmas, it's going to just turn into green and brown and goo, and it's going to be what it's going to be. But
our attendance has been hit.
So I got to ask you.
December.
Sorry, say that again.
Our attendance has been hit hard this December. It's been hard. We had to cancel one Sunday. We've had 2 more Sundays of Advent that just were really low attendance because the weather was bad or dangerous. I mean, it's not just that's the thing. It's not just bad weather. It's dangerous weather to even be out in it. So it's been a rough December, that's for sure.
Yeah. So for this Sunday, do you guys do anything special for the Sunday after Christmas?
Not really. It's kind of, I mean, we've done some things in the past. We've done our interactive Christmas, the ABCs that we've shared before. We've done, sometimes we do like a special brunch or something, just to try to give it something a little extra because it does feel like kind of a downer Sunday. We're doing a youth lock-in pretty close around it, not exactly on the 28th, but okay. So we're doing like a winter break stuff with our youth, but I don't think our worship's going to be pretty simple, pretty straightforward.
Oh, that's fair enough. Yeah. I mean, we always do a lessons and carols the week after. Part of it is it's one of our lowest attended Sundays and always has been the 10 years I've been here. Like it's a pretty low attended Sunday. Which is fine. It is what it is. And actually I kind of like it because I feel like it's that last hurrah, of like, all right, if you missed one of the weeks in which we were going to do, if you missed a week in which we were going to sing your favorite Christmas hymn, come this week, you'll get it. If you missed because you didn't get to hear your favorite passage that is Christmas to you, come in and you'll get it this week. You just kind of, we get all the different pieces covered. So yeah, I kind of dig it. I like that we're doing it. I'm not going to lie. It's kind of nice not to preach, although it's nice not to preach. It's an odd thing because of the tradition of this church. I don't remember the last time I actually preached Christmas one. And so that kind of makes me a little bit sad. There are all these weird, fun little passages that we get, like today's passage that isn't quite Epiphany, a little bit pre-Epiphany. So
yeah, that's the thing. This, the year A Christmas really Christmas 1A and Epiphany really pair well together. Better really than Christmas 1A and 2A. So just so you know, we're going to be recording that as soon as we're done with this one. We're going to knock out Epiphany as well, and we've decided not to do Christmas 2A, partly because it's just one, because the gospel reading of 2A is the Gospel of John, which we just talked about with Christmas Eve, and two, the Matthew, like, this reading is basically the prequel. Like, this sets up Epiphany so perfectly. It really does just work together well.
Yeah, seeing that makes me, maybe that's why I'm feeling a little bit sad that I'm not preaching it this year, but maybe I'll have to think about that next time the year A rolls around. But let's dig into it because we're already kind of dipping our toes into it. So let's just jump right on in.
Very few comparatively know what is the gospel of Jesus Christ.
Good news, everyone!
All right. Well, the good news this week, as we've said repeatedly, is Matthew 2:13 through 23. This is the Common English Bible. When the Magi had departed, an angel from the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream and said, "Get up and take the child and his mother and escape to Egypt. Stay there until I tell you, for Herod will soon search for the child in order to kill him." Joseph got up and during the night took the child and his mother to Egypt. He stayed there until Herod died. This fulfilled what the Lord had spoken through the prophet. "I have called my son out of Egypt." When Herod knew that the Magi had fooled him, he grew very angry. He sent soldiers to kill all the children in Bethlehem and in all the surrounding territory who were 2 years old and younger, according to the time that he had learned from the Magi. This fulfilled the word spoken through Jeremiah the prophet. A voice was heard in Ramah, weeping and much grieving, Rachel weeping for her children, and she did not want to be comforted because they were no more. After King Herod died, an angel from the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt. "Get up," the angel said, "and take the child and his mother and go to the land of Israel. Those who are trying to kill the child are dead." Joseph got up, took the child and his mother, and went to the land of Israel. But when he heard that Archelaus ruled over Judea in place of his father Herod, Joseph was afraid to go there. Having been warned in a dream, he went to the area of Galilee. He settled in a city called Nazareth, so that what was spoken through the prophets might be fulfilled. He will be called a Nazarene.
Okay, so slight problem from what we just said. This is actually after, right?
Yeah.
We're flipping them, right? So there is a little bit of confusion here. So Epiphany Sunday is Matthew 2:1 through 12, and that's the visit of the Magi. This now picks up right where we are. It doesn't pick up right where we left off. It picks up right where next week is going to leave off. So we're reading the story flipped around, and that's weird, right? And so I'm not sure how to deal with this, other than, especially if you're going to do Epiphany on January 4th, which obviously isn't Epiphany, but a lot of times we call it Epiphany Sunday. That's somewhat problematic, and this is one of those moments where, I think of Ralph Jacobson. I think of other people that talk about the lectionary being built for the preacher, not the preacher for the lectionary, right?
Mhm.
This is meant to be helpful. It might be helpful to flip them. I mean, to tell the first part of the story this week and the second part of the story next week. But if not, but then it's not really Epiphany. It's more just, I don't know. I get it. It's a struggle. I get this is partly why the narrative lectionary exists, is because of these problems. But this one is, the flight from Egypt is so rich with storytelling and intrigue and sneaking away and fleeing and refugees, and it's a fascinating story. It's definitely worth telling, and it's often forgotten because we get so caught up in the shepherds and the wise men. We forget this part, which is a much darker story, but also incredibly timely, and it's just told flipped around. So that's a frustrating moment. I'm not really sure, but know that these things work together, and this is what's happening.
Lectionary, hooray! Yeah, I mean you're right. I mean, this is one where, so a couple things. There are those of you who are listening who are hardcore lectionary because that's your tradition, because that's who you are. what have you. In which case, just be honest with folks. I mean, I would almost do something right at the very beginning, even before the scripture, and say, you're going to hear part 2 now, and we're going to hear part 1 next week. We're going to Star Wars this, right? We're going to start with episode 2.
We're writing the machete order of the Epiphany story.
Exactly. So fair enough. It's fine. Just own it. Or remember that lectionary was made for the church. The church wasn't made for the lectionary. So if you need to swap it around, you need to do it, and that works in your context. Then the good news is that we are going to have the next episode, which is going to talk about Epiphany. And because of the holidays, we're recording it right after this. So you can find it right on our website. Go to pulpitfiction.com. And if you want to jump ahead and do Epiphany, totally fine. There's a bunch of information. You can get all the information stuff that you need there. And so I think that it's fine to do it either way. I feel, and I can be way off here, and I'm sure that I am. I feel a little disappointed that this, to some extent, that this passage is this Sunday, because this is an important passage. And for those of us, especially living in the States, although I suspect other folks in other countries have similar things, but for those of you who know, probably everybody in the world does, is that the crackdown and unimaginable dehumanization that our current administration is doing against immigrants and refugees is horrific. And this is a very poignant passage that is constantly being referred to, especially by progressive pastors. And so we're going to get into that, some of the sticky wicket of that in a moment, but I do feel as if this is a good passage that needs to be preached on, that needs to be talked about. And I'm worried it will get lost in the holiday craziness, and we will not be given the due diligence of exactly what you said, Rob, of the terror, of the fear, of the worry, of the really horrible part of the story that too often we just overlook.
Yeah. And of course, that horrible part of the story is it's a replay of the Passover, right? And Jesus is the new Moses. As Matthew, there's themes throughout Matthew of this idea that Jesus is the new Moses, the new bringer of salvation, the new bringer of not just the law, but the reinterpreter of the law. From the very way Matthew is structured, to little details, like to the way that Matthew treats the Hebrew Bible, to little this story of Jesus going to Egypt, coming out of Egypt, saved as a child from a tyrannical king. Historically, it's dubious, right? There's no real account of something like this. Granted, Bethlehem was not a very large town. I mean, it's probably a couple hundred people, maybe 1,000. I remember I looked it up, and 1,000 people was the highest estimate I saw, and I think that's the maximum. Was probably much less, probably half that or so. So we're not talking about a huge amount of children. So that it's possible it might not have been it would have been just sort of a blip in ancient history and not really recorded. But at the same time, there's no real. This is the only mention of something like this ever happening, and yet at the same time, it fits, right? It's like Herod was not a good king. Herod was he killed his own family, right? He was incredibly jealous, incredibly paranoid. He did not have any qualms about killing his rivals or even his own family, who, because of the Herods, plural, there was incredible rivalry between them, between splitting up this kingdom. In fact, this king, correct me if I'm wrong, but this King Herod at the birth, when he dies, the kingdom is split up into 3 because this Herod is Herod the Great is so tyrannical, and they wanted to break up his power to a certain extent. There's all sorts of intrigue and stuff that happens with that. And so, whether or not this has a historical background or not, it certainly fits Herod's character, and it fits the idea that the king had power. This kind of power was kingly power, and this kind of fear is exactly the kind of fear that Jews would have lived in under the time, and this kind of oppression is the kind of oppression that people were faced with. And so the story whether or not it happened is certainly there's a believability here, and that I think is what's really important. And of course, right, because we know that Matthew needs to get both Matthew and Luke have the problem of thinking that Jesus was born in Bethlehem but lived in Nazareth, and they have
Yeah.
two very different ways of reconciling that. But this is Matthew's way, that is the slaughter of the innocents, the flee to Egypt, and then settling in Nazareth because he's afraid of settling in Bethlehem again.
Yeah, that exactly. Both of them come up with very fascinating ways. Here you have that they were originally from Bethlehem the whole time and then have to settle in Nazareth. Obviously, you've got the whole no room in the Catalume story that we talked about last time with the Christmas Eve episode about how did they get there? Well, he had to be born in Bethlehem because of this census that most likely didn't happen, all those other pieces. Yeah, I think your point is well taken, Rob, which is, did this happen? Maybe, maybe not. I think it's questionable. I think this is much more, as you said, of painting Herod as the new Pharaoh. But let's also be clear. The purpose for Herod killing all of these children is because he is worried that a king is going to be born, which will threaten his power and his throne. Herod the Great had already executed 3 of his sons, his own sons, because he was worried that they were going to commit treason and steal the throne from him. So he was incredibly paranoid. He also had his wife, who supposedly he loved, up to the point in which he had her killed, and her mother and her grandfather also killed because he suspected them of treason and trying to usurp the throne. Herod was so bad. You got to remember, right? This is a dusty backwater in the middle of nowhere. This isn't a jewel of the Roman Republic, or Roman Empire, I should say. However, Herod was so notorious for murdering his family that there is a story, and maybe it's apocryphal, maybe not, but there's a story that the Roman Emperor Augustus said it is better to be Herod's pig than his son. Basically acknowledging that because the Jews didn't eat pigs, that a pig had a better chance of surviving in Herod's household than Herod's own children, because Herod repeatedly, in fact, Archelaus is remarkable because he was one of the few sons who actually survived. It's actually amazing that he survived and was not killed by Herod. So this is something, and Amy Jo Levine talks about this in the Women's Bible Commentary and also says, it most likely, and she points this out, that this could be a contrast between and basically a subtle political jab at Herod. By here you have Joseph, who's willing to bend over backward to care for his wife, and a child who is his but kind of not his. We talked about that awkwardness in the 4th Sunday of Advent. Whereas Herod doesn't care. He'll murder his own children. So you have that, but it is, in Amy Jo Levine's words, it fits the character. It is possible. Even though Herod may not have ordered the killing of innocents, it's not below him to do such a thing. So I think that that's a helpful piece to say, this is the story that we have. What is this story communicating? What is the narrative? At the end of the day, you have somebody whose power is being threatened and will go to any extreme to protect his power. Which,
Yeah,
and go ahead.
Which we get, and it's also very, it's a different Herod. But when you fast forward in the Gospel of Matthew to Herod Antipas, his son, I imagine, who kills John the Baptist, right? There's this great juxtaposition of the banquet of Herod Antipas, who, at that banquet murders John the Baptist, who he knew was righteous, with Jesus feeding the 5,000. Right. So there's this, here's one way of being a father or a shepherd. Right. Here's one way of being. Yep. This is Joseph, who's doing anything he can to save and protect his wife and son, who he adopts. And then there's Herod, who kills everybody just in case they might threaten him. And then, of course, fast forward in the Gospel of Matthew of Herod Antipas, who has a banquet where murdering a righteous man is the entertainment, and
Right.
Jesus, who has a banquet where they're made to lay down in green pastures, right? And everybody has enough to eat. And so this is, maybe that's a stretch of a parallel, but I think that's exactly right too. That this is showing who Herod is. This is what empire does. Um, it it is violent, it is fearful, um, and because of that, people suffer.
Yeah.
And Jesus and his family have to flee, right? And so the flight to Egypt, um, it's such a quick thing, but think about that journey, right? I mean, this is the same. This is a dangerous thing. There are people, and there's a lot of debate over who, so this is why I've said, and I have no problem calling them refugees. They're political refugees in the sense of they are fleeing from the power, um, to find safety. They're refugees from their home. They were in safety, and then they were not, and it was because of Herod. And so they go to Egypt because, if they don't, they'll die, right? And when we talk about, is it parallel to modern refugees? I, you know, I saw somebody say, "Well, they were citizens." I'm like, really? I don't. Was Jesus a citizen of Rome? I don't think so.
No. Yeah.
But like national boundaries were different. I mean, this is King Herod wasn't really the king. Roman emperor was really the king, right? So like drawing straight parallels between modern nation states and immigration might not be that useful. But there's no question that this is a family that fled violence and survived because they were welcomed. Whoever welcomed them in Egypt welcomed them, saved their lives, right? And he's able to come back and be the savior of the world because somebody welcomed him in Egypt. And I don't think that's a stretch to make that argument, whether or not they're refugees or not, whatever that term means as far as the United Nations or international law or immigration is concerned. Hospitality saved their lives, and I think that we can say without question.
Yeah, it's Mary Ludy, Reverend Dr. Mary Ludy was a professor at Andover Newton Theological School and minister at Wellesley Village Church and Congregational Church in Cambridge, all sorts of things. Mary Ludy's amazing, but she had this piece that somebody had attributed to her, so I'm attributing it to her as well, but that she had written on social media where she wrote, "I'm seeing a lot of threads on Facebook that debate whether one can say Jesus was a refugee with any kind of biblical or historical legitimacy, and I've grown impatient with them. For me, the trouble with arguments pro and con the refugee status of the Holy Family is that they try to make a historical and biblical case that relies on a strange kind of literalism. Was it legal or not to cross the border back then? Did they have passports back then? Or did no one need them? How long did they stay out of the country? And can they be called refugees if they didn't intend to stay long? Such arguments, both pro and con, thus also depend on thinking about Christ in the past tense. But he is not in the past. Faith says he is among the living. He lives in the presence. So instead of trying to find ways to identify him and the Holy Family as bona fide refugees, or to refute the characterization based on the Bible text, variously interpreted on just the quote unquote facts of history, we would do better to take Jesus at his word as a grown-up when he said, "Whatever you do to the least of these, my siblings, you do to me." He identifies himself absolutely with the poor, the vulnerable, the victimized, the injured, the stranger, and the refugee. There's absolutely no difference between him and them. They are one. When we see them now, it's him we're seeing now. Was Jesus really and truly a refugee back then? Don't know. And almost don't care. Is Jesus a refugee now? You bet your life he is. So help him for God's sake, or else don't claim to love him. I mean,
Yeah, that's well said.
I had to read those words because I couldn't have said it better and I couldn't have written it better. And it's one of the things I love about Reverend Dr. Ludy, but it's that piece of, it's an odd thing because the very same people that want to debate and do this, the literalism of the Bible, are the first to point to this and be like, "Well, look, it says he was a refugee." I love the fact that she points out that's not the point. The point is he still identifies with it. And there's this weird, again, a lot of this coming back and forth of out of Egypt and all these things. There's a lot of different ways to try to get Jesus back to Nazareth, to justify it by using scripture, which Matthew loves to do. He does a little bit of proof texting on his own. Oh, they said, out of Egypt I will call him. All these other pieces. At the end of it, and you were saying this too, Rob, who is Jesus with? Jesus is with refugees. Jesus is with those who welcome the ones who are hurting, victimized strangers and aliens in our land, the ones who are being persecuted. That's who Jesus is. And we can bet it's who Jesus was as well. And so I feel like a lot can be done with this to really do that without having to say, I think anybody who is definitively really jumping into what exactly happened historically, I think it's a tricky, slippery slope that we fall into, especially if we believe in not taking the Bible too literally. I think that can be a literalism piece. But I think, Rob, your initial point, which is that hospitality of those in Egypt saved him, the hospitality of those in Nazareth who later welcomed them. And the fact, Rob, that I think is important too, is this story and the Luke story, this coming right on the heels of the Luke story. We talked last week, or not even last week, on our Christmas Eve episode about reading the Luke story and how much of that story, remember, is wrong. Like, it's just not right. Like the census and so many, like the Catalumi, no room at the end, like all these things that, it's not quite right. At the end, in the story that we had in Luke that most of us are going to hear and read on Christmas Eve, says Jesus was born in a world of economic injustice, deep poverty, homelessness, and he and his family were forced from their home in Nazareth by a brutal, oppressive empire. In Matthew, we have Jesus born into a world of deep political injustice, where the poor and marginalized are being slaughtered, and where, again, a ruthless empire has forced him from the safety of home into the unknown. So yes, we have very different, arguably incompatible stories in many ways. Like, we have very different tellings. They're both trying to tell something different, but the broad strokes, they're still there.
Yeah, it's the same thing, right? It's the same struggle, and it's the same humility. It's the same, under the heels of oppression. The fact that Jesus goes to Egypt is fascinating for a lot of reasons. One we've already mentioned. We had a commentator in the chat, John, point out it's interesting that the Holy Family flees to Egypt when Pharaoh in Egypt was the last to kill all the male infants born around Moses' time. A lot of neat parallels here. Of course, that's part of what we're talking about. This, as Matthew tells the story, he's telling the story as if this is a new Exodus and Jesus is the new Pharaoh. But the other thing I think is even more interesting, and going back to Egypt for safety, when a major, if not the major story of God's people was fleeing slavery in Egypt, is such a transformation of an enemy place, right? Egypt is not safety, like, as far as most people are concerned. That's not the place. It's not the place you would go. Egypt has been the place of the enemy for so long. That is the historical, even going back to the prophets, right? So much of this struggle, even though Egypt never put the Israelites in exile, they were certainly part of the story of the fear, right? The Egyptian power was always part of the fear, and yet it's, once again, it's not about Egyptian fear. It's not about any fear, right? It's about safety and hospitality and finding welcome in a place where they didn't expect it.
Yeah.
So we'll talk more. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say the other piece, and I know we're dipping into next week, but we talked about how this is so deeply connected with Epiphany, and it may be a teaser. Maybe we'll talk about this too in our next show. But it's interesting. We've talked about this before in past Epiphany episodes, that the ability for them to flee arguably is only made possible because of the gifts provided by the Magi, right? That the frankincense and myrrh, while yes, having funerary and religious symbolism, were also medicines that were used to treat women postpartum to help with hemorrhaging and other issues that would have helped Mary heal so that she would be able to actually make the journey to Egypt on foot. There's no evidence that she was on a donkey. So the other side of it too is the gold, the gold to be able to do it. So the hospitality is enveloping here, Rob. It's not just those who welcomed in Egypt, but it's also the gifts of those that made that possible, that there was a tangible point. And yes, there's the, we all have sung We Three Kings, and we know that, the gold for a king, and the incense for a prophet or for a priest, and the myrrh for a sacrifice. Yes, I know. We'll get into that more later and things like that. But I like to think too that there's also a practicality of this, that were this to happen, were we to say, okay, but this was also, they knew this was going to happen. And more so, remember that they met with Herod, the king's, the Magi met with the king and knew presumably what a corrupting influence he was, and knew to go home by a different way, right? To fool Herod, as we hear referred to in this piece. So there's something else extraordinary here, where it's not just the hospitality of the Egyptians in that piece, Rob, too, but it's also the hospitality and the gifts that surround the Holy Family that saved their life as well.
Yeah, and it's the foolishness of Herod again, too, right?
Well,
he is tricked by the Magi, these foreign magicians, these weirdos, these other in every way, from a foreign land, practicing a foreign religion, practicing what might be considered even a wicked religion. If they do, Magi, it almost implies things like astrology and things that the Hebrew Bible prohibits, and yet they thwart the plans of the Hebrew king, much like the women thwarted the Pharaoh, much like and Herod is shown to be a fool, much like Herod Antipas was shown to be a fool by his daughter, right? Who was manipulated by his daughter. So again, it's also about the absurdity and the impotence of the Herods in their tyranny. And even though they're the ones that built the great temple, right, the great wonder of the world, he's also the one who's fooled by these Magi and acts in this horrible way and is unsuccessful again.
Well, and let's be clear, he didn't build a temple, he just built the mount, right? The Temple Mount.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, so absolutely. I mean, it's one of those of, let's not give him any more credit than he needs.
Sure. Well, yeah, I mean, the great builder, the builder of projects, right? He was the great because of these other things that he did. He also built temples to Greek, Roman gods as well, if I'm not mistaken. So, I mean, but who was supposedly, and again, King Herod, supposedly the king of the Jews, right? Mm-hmm. Which is exactly what Jesus's, epitaph says at the end. But
I'm going to put in one last piece here that I just thinking of, because we were talking about, how Jesus is born in Bethlehem, but he's also from Nazareth. I wonder too if there is why is that so important to the narrative? Right? Why is it so important? I mean, is it just the Micah piece? Why is it important that Jesus is born in Bethlehem? Why is that so critical to Matthew and to Luke? And it's got to be more than just Micah 5, right? Micah 5, 2-5, that I'm sure most of us are going to read, oh, but you, oh, Bethlehem of Ephrathah, right? This is a passage that a lot of us, if we haven't read already, we're going to read the next couple of weeks. We talked about how the divide among the Jewish communities from Galilee to Judea in Jesus's time, right? You had the Jerusalem Jews and that surrounding area, which were like the real Jews. And then you had the Galilean Jews on the other side of Samaria that weren't as good. And I wonder if there's a piece of this where this is so important that we will go to such extremes that both Matthew and Luke have to say, nope, it was both. It was Bethlehem and it was from Nazareth, to basically have Jesus have a foot in each camp. Jesus is from the line of David, but he's also part of the Galilean Jews. You understand what I mean? I don't know.
Yeah, he's from Judah and he was raised in Galilee. Yeah, absolutely. I think there might be something to that for sure.
Yeah. All right. Well, there is a lot more in the show notes. So we hope that you will go check that out at pulpitfiction.com. But right now, we got to turn to a little bit of Isaiah.
Previously on the Bible.
Ruth, I smell Heaven's bakery cooking up something good for you, sister.
All right. Well, Heaven's Bakery is cooking up Isaiah 63, skipping nearly to the end, 63 verses 7 through 9. I will recount the Lord's faithful acts. I will sing the Lord's praises because of all the Lord did for us, for God's great favor toward the house of Israel. God treated them compassionately and with deep affection. God said, truly they are my people, children who won't do what is wrong. God became their savior. During all their distress, God also was distressed. So a messenger who served him saved them. In love and mercy, God redeemed them, lifting and carrying them throughout earlier times.
All right. This is weird. This is a weird passage. I'm just going to say that right now. It's weird. It's because if you just pluck this piece, Rob, just these pieces, there's the beginning of this idea that it's taken so far out of context. However, it feels a little proof texty, to be honest. Barbara Brown Taylor says, preachers who turn to Isaiah for his comforting words this Sunday will have to ignore everything they learned in seminary about interpreting a text in context. For these 3 verses are airlifted out of a chapter thick with divine wrath and human despair. Okay, that's, I'm not going to argue with BBT on that. That being said, there is a shift from verses 1 through 6, which are very wrathful and all of that. And this is a shift. And I think that the beauty of this shift is a big part of the human condition. And by that, I mean, even if you go back and you say, okay, we have all this wrathful stuff from God, we have a shift here that moves to God's mercy. And we also have this acknowledgement, I think, too, that God will come, God will save them, God will watch after them. And at the same time, right after this passage, in verse 10, we're also going to acknowledge that people are going to mess up. So we have this verse 7, I'll remember God, it's great compassion. Verse 8, God, they're my people, they're my children, they won't do wrong. God became their savior. In all their distress, God was also distressed. And in their love and mercy, God redeemed them. Doesn't this sound good, Rob? Verse 10 right after this says, but they rebelled and they made God's Holy Spirit terribly sad. So he turned into their enemy and he fought against them. But then verse 11, then they remembered early times and he rescued his people. Where was the one who drew them up from the sea, the shepherd from the flock? Where was the one amidst his Holy Spirit? So what am I getting at here? What I'm getting at is I actually enjoy this passage if it is broadened out a little bit, and it may be helpful with the Herod passage, the Matthew passage, because many people right now feel like we are living under the horrors of empire, rising nationalism, division, totalitarianism, Christian nationalism, white supremacy, and on and on and on. And I've had 3 conversations in the last 24 hours with friends and colleagues and church people all about, is this going to get better? Is it going to get worse? Rob, the thing I like about this passage from Isaiah 63 is, yeah, it will get better. And then there's a chance that it's going to get worse again. And then it will get better. I mean, there is this disturbing pattern, a circular, almost cyclical pattern. We see it going all the way back to Judges. I mean, the book of Judges, this is it, which is people are faithful and then they forget God and they forget that they should be caring for the least of these and doing those things, and everything falls apart and gets horrible and awful. And in Isaiah, it makes God's Holy Spirit terribly sad. It's so depressing. That's verse 10. And then in love and mercy, God redeems us and we come back around and God is our savior and brings us around. And then we convince ourselves that now we kind of saved ourselves and we don't need to carry, right? We have these cyclical pieces, which can be incredibly depressing that we aren't progressing into the kingdom on earth. But I'd like to think of it as comforting in the fact that it talks about God's steadfast love and faithfulness. And it talks about the past that, to still, as I've quoted many times before, one of my favorite old spirituals, that trouble don't last always, that there's this other piece that's coming.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's and I think sometimes it's okay to not be seminary Hebrew Bible exegetes.
Yeah.
Right. Just let this be. Let the poetry be the poetry in this moment. And yeah, I mean, so I totally hear what you're saying, that it is, even if you read the rest of Isaiah, it just continues to the very end, the sort of back and forth of, I'm saving you, but you'll forget. And, I'm trying to, Isaiah 66 talks about, I'm birthing something, and birth takes a while, right? And it's painful, and there's a long process. But when you were reading this, the first thing that I chuckled, like, man, God was wrong. Verse 8, truly, God said, they are my people who won't do what is wrong. Well, sorry, God. You're wrong about that one. So much for the infallible God, if he thought that we weren't going to do anything wrong. Because 2 verses later, they rebelled, right? But more seriously, I hear these couple verses, it's Auld Lang Syne, right? Like, it's just this beautiful, like, it's one of I love Auld Lang Syne, and for old acquaintance be forgot, for good old times, let's have a cup of kindness yet, for Auld Lang Syne, just for good old times. And there's a yearning that comes at the end of the year that is looking back at what we've got, what we've done, what we've accomplished, when we've cried, when we've failed. And what do we need? Just a cup of kindness.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Sometimes there's just, it's not about wrath or judgment or reward or glory. It's just, we've been through a lot. And in this moment, we can have just a cup of kindness. And then it's also this looking forward to this open future that can be. So yeah, I mean, if you just lift 7, 8, and 9 out and sing for Auld Lang Syne at the same time, right? That there's been trouble. We've been through a lot. Let's just be together and move forward together at the same time. I don't know. Sometimes I feel like I want to detach the deep exegete in this moment and just let this be. Let the poetry of the end of the year and the reflecting on an emotional and busy time just be, and the companionship with God and with one another.
Yeah, I like that. And I like that idea. I mean, it's a good point of, like, what does this look like as we come to the end of the year? And this, as you said, the cup of kindness, which of course, connects very beautifully back to Christ. And I think too, the odd and underlying message in this passage is God's chesed.
Yeah.
I mean, because God says, listen, they were horrible, but now they've come around and now they're my children and they won't do wrong again. And then they do wrong again, and God continues to save them. And then we do wrong, and God continues to save them. I guess my thought too is empires rise and fall. And I don't say that to make light of the horrors that they commit, but the enduring truth is the chesed and grace of God. And the ways in which we also can mirror that, embody that, allow it to shine through us, even though we will fail. And when we fail, we do what? We repent, we change our hearts and minds, we metanoia, we turn back to God, we miss the mark, we try again and do those pieces. And, as you said, Rob, you were talking about the end of the year, in Auld Lang Syne. We all sing Auld Lang Syne. We have a cup of cheer. And then the next day, what do? We resolve to do better.
to do better. Yeah.
So there's also this piece in this cycle to say, this time we're going to do a little better. And to steal, that, what is it, Niemöller with the old quote, the moral arc of the universe is long, but it is bending towards justice. Well, excuse me, the arc of our lives is long, but perhaps with each of those cycles, we bend it a little bit more toward faithfulness.
Yeah. And I love the, verse 9, during all their distress, God also was distressed.
Yes.
I mean, that's Emmanuel. That's the footprints poem, right? That's the footprints on a beach, right? Like, when you were struggling, I was there. Like, it's not, I love that, because it's not God was crushing you because of it. And you can find that here, right? You can find the punishment and all that kind of stuff. But the idea of God being distressed, God's spirit being terribly sad, there's something very poignant and vulnerable in that idea as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you're preaching this passage, you would do yourself a disservice unless you read all of chapter 63 and 64. I think, Rob, you're right. Come back and just get those pieces. But I think it's helpful to look at it, look at the broad picture, look at the Bible study picture, and then dial it back, because I don't think you have to super exegete it. I'm not saying, I think that there are some aspects there, but there are so many beautiful little pieces here that I think are just gorgeous and could be brought back in there. So friends, go and check that out. Again, there's a lot more. There's also a lot in the show notes, Rob. We have a lot of show notes on this passage. So friends, feel free to go and check out those show notes over at pulpitfiction.com.
Now that's a tasty wafer.
Our wafer this week, is it tasty, Rob? Yeah, I don't know about that. Because it's Hebrews, not our favorite book of the Bible, but it is what it is. Here we go. It is Hebrews 2:10 through 18. It was appropriate for God, for whom and through whom everything exists, to use experiences of suffering to make perfect the pioneer of salvation. This salvation belongs to many sons and daughters whom he's leading to glory. This is because the one who makes people holy and people who are being made holy all come from one source. That is why Jesus isn't ashamed to call them brothers and sisters when he says, I will publicly announce your name to my brothers and sisters. I will praise you in the middle of the assembly. He also says, I will rely on him. And also, here I am with the children whom God has given me. Therefore, since the children share in flesh and blood, he also shared the same things in the same way. He did this to destroy the one who holds power over death, the devil, by dying. He set free those who were being held in slavery by their entire lives by the fear of death. Of course, he isn't trying to help angels, but rather he's helping Abraham's descendants. Therefore, he had to be made like his brothers and sisters in every way. This was so he could become a merciful and faithful high priest in things relating to God, in order to wipe away the sins of the people. He's able to help those who are being tempted, since he himself experienced suffering when he was tempted.
All right. Hebrews is tough. I think when a few years ago, we slogged through Hebrews. I mean, it comes up in the lectionary and we did it. And I think when you spend some time in Hebrews, you can get a better appreciation of it. The problem with Hebrews is when we just dip our toe in it. And it's this very deep theology that is very, very seeped in Jewish tradition and understanding of the sacrifice and the temple priests and all of that. And so when you just kind of jump in real quick, it starts to sound very, redemptive suffering, very sacrificial. What I lean in on, especially, is this last paragraph. This is the why, right? Like Matthew and Luke tell us the how. How did Jesus be born? How was the incarnation happening? Even John, how was the word made flesh? This is why. And the why is it so important that Jesus is fully human and fully divine. It becomes much more beautiful when you start thinking of this as God trying so desperately to know us.
Yeah.
He became Christ, became flesh, so that he could suffer, because so that God could truly know what suffering is, right? Because God, and it sounds crazy, like God, how is God going to know suffering? Well, becomes human and then he knows it,
Yeah.
right? How is God going to know what death is without dying? How is God going to know what, and then you can go on, love is without loving, how God is mourning is without mourning, and he made like so he had to be made like his brothers and sisters in every way so he could become merciful. How could you become merciful unless you were shown mercy? And this is, so the Hebrews theology, it's high theology and it can be complicated, but ultimately this intimate relationship of who God is, why God had to become human, because that's the only way God could understand what it is to be human. And it can be a powerful thing, but it is loaded as well, for sure.
I think that your point about that God became human to understand humanity is well taken. I think we get in trouble when we say things like, how could God be merciful unless he experienced mercy? How could God be loving unless he had the opportunity to love? The tricky thing is then, prior to Jesus, we don't have a merciful and loving God, right?
Sure,
And so, and I know that's not what you're saying,
that's
but
problematic.
it's a tricky, slippery slope. I do think that this piece of, and we've talked about this, where what is it for God to experience the fear of death? Father, let this cup pass from me.
Mhm.
Right? What is it like for God to be tempted? What is it like for God to be called to account by the Syrophoenician woman, the Canaanite woman, depending on which, you're talking Mark or Matthew? What does it mean for God to experience hunger? What does it mean for God to be tempted? There are things that are extremely human. We've talked about, sin itself, that are essentially human, that may not have been part of who God was prior to this. So what is it like? But in the end of it, it's this. It is God's desire to be with us. And it's not that God wasn't with us before Christ, but rather, if we couldn't see it before and hear God's voice before as it came to us in the prophets, then God's saying, okay, if you couldn't hear it, you couldn't see it, then I'm going to come right down in front of you and show it and show it to you, and show you, and in the process, show you the way to live, not dominated by the fear of what happens next. And for me, Rob, I think that's a powerful piece, which is this verse of 15. He set free those who are held in slavery their entire lives by fear of death. I think that there's two pieces here. It's not just the fear of death, but I would say, especially for Christians now, and this is out of the context necessarily of Hebrews, but for those who are hearing it now, to say those who are enslaved by the fear of death, by the fear of damnation, or by the enraptured promise of whatever materialistic heaven we have concocted for ourselves. And I think that it's a different enslavement to basically turn heaven into our divine reward that we get, which is also deeply problematic. If the only reason we're being faithful is to get eternal salvation, well, that is self-serving and problematic in and of itself as well. So I think a lot of those things, which is God came that we might have life and have it abundantly, to steal from John. So I think that is a powerful piece. And this piece too, that I think would have to be translated a bit, but the idea of the high priest, like this intercessor, and I feel like that idea of like the wiping away the sins is a little bit tricky, because we're not coming out of a sacrificial priesthood. That's not, there's a different, Hebrews is speaking to such a very particular time, to a very particular people that are also living out the horrific trauma of seeing their house of God destroyed and their people scattered. So it's very particular. I think that it's a little tricky in this to do that. But again, I think that this piece of 18, which says, God is there to help you when you're tempted because God was tempted. God is there to help you when you feel betrayed because God was betrayed. God is there to be with you in whatever you feel. and that the incarnation is ongoing.
Yeah. This incarnation is still existing. And I just rewatched The Good Place, and great show. And spoiler alerts, one of the characters, the Ted Danson character, is a demon, an immortal being who learns to love these humans because of all these things. And he can't understand. One of the arguments they make, and I don't remember what season it is, but there's this argument that he has with Eleanor, the main woman character, and he can't understand what it is to be human until he understands what death is. Until you can understand that until you can understand your finality, that things end, then you can't really be human. And part of the argument of the whole show, and I think it's somewhat faithful, is you can't really understand life. You can't really enjoy life and appreciate life until you understand that it is temporary.
Yeah.
That it is going to end. And so fear of death can give us anxiety and cause us to sin, because it's fear of scarcity and fear of all of these things. But if you embrace death not as something to fear, but as part of our existence, and understand that it's been overcome in love and grace, that changes everything.
Yeah.
I mean, again, Hebrews is just a really deep philosophical book, and this is a good piece. And there's, that's a great. I don't know if you've seen that show, haven't you? It's one of my favorites, because it deals with so many of these things in a very real and poignant way without being explicitly Christian. And of course, at the end, again, spoiler alert, Michael becomes human, right? Like that's his whole
it's so cool.
thing,
It's so beautiful.
right? Like, and it is so beautiful because that's better than being immortal in a lot of ways.
Yeah, it's worth a watch if you got some time over the holidays. Definitely check out The Good Place for sure. Friends, there's a lot more. There's a lot more. Go check that out. Pulpitfiction.com. Well, thank you all for joining us for this episode of the Pulpit Fiction Podcast. We would love to hear from you. By the way, special welcome to all those who are joining us for the first time. Again, we'd love to hear from you. Our home and webpage is pulpitfiction.com. You can find us also on Instagram and Facebook at Pulpit Fiction. You can find us on X at Pulpit F Podcast. You can find us also on Google Play. Good Lord, how old is that? You can find us on YouTube, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, so many other amazing places. So please go and check it out there. You can always email us, show@pulpitfiction.us, and you can support the show by going to pulpitfiction.com/support. I want to thank two new donors. First is Michael Harbour, who not only made a donation, thanks so much, Michael, but also wrote us a comment and said, "A mentor of mine told me about y'all when I was in seminary in 2019. You two have been a part of my sermon prep every week since. Thank you so much for the blessing of your podcast and commentary." Mike. Thanks, Mike, so much for that comment. Thanks for your support. Thanks for being a listener. Also, big shout out to Scott Elliott, who's commented on the show before, and seminary colleague of Rob and I as well. Scott also made a donation to the show and said, "Pulpit Fiction is full of wise prose and spirit-rich theology that sings progressive Christianity with love of God and neighbor at the forefront." What a blessing. Scott, you're a blessing to us. Thank you so much again for your support to both Mike and to Scott and to so many of you that help the show keep going. If you want to be like Mike and Scott and so many others, go to pulpitfiction.com/support.
Well, you can watch live shows from YouTube. You got to go to youtube.com/@pulpitfiction. And then you can find our channel and see when we have our live shows, usually at 1:30 on Wednesdays. We should probably say 1:45 because it's very seldom that we're actually live at 1:30. Today it was almost 2 by the time we got on live. And of course, right now we're going to come back to back and bring you the next episode as well, live on YouTube. And if you're watching on YouTube, we'd love for you to subscribe. It's growing slowly. We're inching toward 100. We'd love to have at least 100 subscribers. That's a cool milestone. But we thank you for all of your support and for watching and listening in the various different ways. Thanks to Scott Fletcher for the voice bumpers, Nikolai Heidlis for the transition music, Brian O'Dean for our closing song. Please have a blessed week.
Hate to say it's time to go, but it happens every time, you know. So now you're free to go about your day. We've heard the word in voice and song. We've wondered and we've laughed along. So go and preach the good news on your way. This is the Pulpit Fiction Podcast for preachers and seekers and Bible geeks. This is the Pulpit Fiction Podcast. We'll see you back next week.